I still remember that night, the one that changed everything. The city lights of New York looked colder than usual, as if even the skyline knew what was about to happen. I stood by the window, my reflection staring back at me, pale, quiet, unfamiliar. I didn't recognize myself anymore. The woman who used to laugh without reason, who believed in love, who believed in him, she was gone. Now, what stared back was someone hollow, someone who had learned to smile only when people were watching. The streets below were alive, cars moving, people talking, life happening, but inside our apartment, it was just silence, thick and heavy like smoke that never cleared. Mark was late again. He had stopped calling when he got stuck at work, stopped explaining, stopped pretending. But I had stopped asking too. Because the truth was, I already knew. I could tell from the smell on his shirt, the perfume that didn't belong to me. It wasn't just a scent, it was a message. A reminder that I wasn't enough anymore. I used to wonder when exactly it started. Maybe the first time he came home late and didn't apologize. Or maybe when he looked at his phone and smiled, a smile I hadn't seen in months. Or maybe when he stopped looking at me altogether. People think betrayal is one big moment, like catching someone red-handed. But no. Betrayal is slow, quiet, and invisible. It starts with distance, grows with excuses, and ends with silence. And silence, that's what I had become an expert at. I remember sitting at the dinner table, his plate untouched, his chair empty. I would wait for hours, pretending I was okay, pretending I wasn't breaking. Sometimes I would cook his favorite meal just to see if he'd even notice. He didn't. He never did. The food went cold, and so did my heart. I remember one night, I called him just to ask if he was safe. He didn't pick up. And when he did, hours later, he laughed it off. "You worry too much," he said. And I wanted to scream. "Because you don't worry at all." But I didn't. I stayed quiet, smiled, said goodnight. Because what's the point of screaming into a void? What's the point of crying when no one listens? My silence became my weapon. My pain became my teacher. I started to observe him like a stranger, every lie he told, every excuse he made. I memorized them all. Not to confront him, but to prepare. You see, people think revenge is a sudden act, but real revenge is patience. It's watching someone dig their own grave, one lie at a time. That night, he came home smelling like someone else's perfume, floral, expensive, too strong to hide. He didn't even notice the look on my face when I saw him. He kissed my forehead, called me darling, and said he was tired. Tired, how ironic. Because I was exhausted too, but not from work, from loving someone who stopped seeing me. As he went to shower, I sat there, staring at the flickering candle on the table. I realized something then. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was power. I had been invisible for so long that he stopped noticing me, and that's exactly how I would destroy him. Quietly. Patiently. Completely. I blew out the candle, watched the smoke rise, and whispered to myself, "This is where it begins." The next morning felt colder than usual. Sunlight came through the blinds, cutting thin golden lines across the floor, but it didn't warm anything. It just revealed how empty everything really was. Mark had already left for work before I even woke up. No goodbye, no note, not even the sound of the door closing softly behind him. I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the sheets, one side untouched, perfectly made, the other a mess of sleepless nights. I had forgotten what it felt like to wake up next to him. The distance between us wasn't measured in miles, but in moments we stopped sharing. For the world, we still looked perfect, smiling couple, stable home, matching rings. But what people didn't see was how silence had moved in between us like an unwanted guest who refused to leave. I spent my mornings pretending to be fine, scrolling through my phone, looking at old photos. In each one, I could see the slow fading of love, his eyes shifting, his smile growing smaller. It was all there, hidden in plain sight. The woman in those pictures, me, looked happy, but now I could see it clearly. She wasn't happy. She was hopeful. And that's worse. Because hope hurts longer. That day, I decided to go through his things. Not to catch him, but to understand how far he had gone. His drawer smelled like cologne and betrayal. There were receipts from restaurants I had never been to, a hotel key card I didn't recognize, and messages that spoke louder than any confession. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Because sometimes the truth doesn't break you, it freezes you. It locks your heart and turns every beat into a countdown. I put everything back exactly the way it was, every receipt, every trace of his secret life. And when I was done, I looked around our apartment, the walls that had heard our laughter, the couch where we watched movies, the kitchen where we danced, all of it now felt like evidence of a crime. That evening, when he came home, I greeted him like always. He kissed my cheek, smiled that tired smile, and asked about dinner. I cooked. I served. I laughed at his fake stories about long meetings. But deep down, I wasn't listening anymore. I was planning. I had no idea what I was going to do yet, but I knew it wouldn't be fast. I didn't want him to realize it. I wanted him to live comfortably in his lies, until they became his nightmare. I started studying him. His routines, his habits, his weaknesses. I memoized every detail the way an artist memoizes a face before painting it. I wanted to know the man behind the lies, so I could erase him completely. Sometimes he would look at me and say. And I would smile, whisper, just tired. He had no idea how right he was. I was tired of being invisible, tired of pretending, tired of forgiving. But I wasn't broken. Not anymore. Every night, after he slept, I sat by the window and wrote everything down, every word he said, every lie he told, every place he went. I didn't know what to call it back then, but now I do. It was the beginning of my revenge. Not the loud kind. The kind that starts with a whisper. The kind that ends in silence. Days turned into weeks, and silence became my weapon. He thought I had stopped caring, but in truth, I had started watching. Every smile he gave, every late-night text he hid, every lie he wrapped in fake exhaustion, I noticed it all. I became a ghost in my own home, unseen but always there. He never realized how close I was to the truth, how I could hear him whisper her name in his sleep. Once, I stood by the doorway and watched him talk on the phone, his voice soft, his smile real, a smile I hadn't seen in months. And in that moment, I didn't feel sadness. I felt clarity. He had already left me, only his shadow lived here now. I stopped wearing the perfume he liked, stopped asking questions, stopped pretending to be the wife he remembered. Because I wasn't her anymore. I was someone new. Someone colder. I started leaving little traces for him, not mistakes, just hints. A misplaced photo of us, a lipstick stain on a wine glass, a message on the mirror written in steam, "Do you still love me?" He'd come out of the shower, see it, and laugh nervously, thinking it was just a joke. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of the game. Each day, I became more precise. I tracked his location, his meetings, his excuses. I even found her, the woman he risked everything for. Her name was Claire. Pretty, young, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who thought she was special because someone else's husband told her so. I followed her once. She had no idea I was behind her, walking slowly. Blending into the crowd. I watched her smile at strangers, take calls with that same warmth I used to have. I wanted to hate her, but I couldn't. Because she wasn't my enemy. She was just another fool. The real enemy was sitting at my dinner table every night, eating my food, and thanking me for understanding. That irony tasted better than the meal itself. Sometimes, I'd pour him a glass of wine and watch his eyes as he talked. I wondered how it would feel to poison it, just enough to make him sick, not enough to kill. But no. Death was too kind. I wanted something slower. Something that made him wish he was dead. So I decided not to destroy him in one blow. I would let him destroy himself. I started recording him, keeping messages, screenshots, documents, a digital trail of his betrayal. Every piece of evidence carefully placed, like dominoes waiting for the final push. He had built this perfect image of himself, loving husband, successful man, and I would make sure it all collapsed, one secret at a time. But I wasn't ready yet. I needed him to trust me again. I needed him to think everything was normal. So I smiled. I touched his hand during dinner. I kissed him goodnight. I became the wife he missed, not because I loved him, but because I wanted him to fall deeper before I pulled him under. Revenge wasn't about rage anymore. It was about art. And I was the artist painting his downfall, stroke by silent stroke. I chose my moment carefully, the moment when he felt safest, the moment when he believed everything had settled back into the comfortable pattern he loved. It was a Friday evening, the kind where the city hums with a slow, satisfied pride and people close their laptops and forget the day's small crimes. Mark came home smiling, lighter than usual, because he thought his secret was still safe. He hugged me the way he used to, and for a second an old muscle in me remembered how to relax, but I kept my calm like a practiced actor. I had arranged a dinner with some of his closest partners under the guise of celebrating a new deal, and he accepted, proud and unsuspecting. The room was warm, the wine poured, laughter light and practiced, but behind the polished toasts I had already laid the groundwork. I had started a quiet bleed from his accounts, a chain of delays and missing invoices that I masked as vendor errors. His firm had begun scrambling quietly to patch gaps they didn't know existed. Tonight's celebration was the perfect stage to let the first curtain fall. As our guests spoke and toasted, I made a small call from the restroom to a journalist I'd slipped an anonymous tip 2 weeks ago, someone I trusted to hold his attention while the rest unraveled. I left the call at a precise minute and returned to the table with a smile that cost nothing and meant nothing. When the screen in the corner of the room flicked to life and a headline crawled across it, no one noticed immediately. The music was loud, someone clinked glasses, and then a friend stood up to signal for attention. The room quieted and the screen filled with documents I had compiled, emails, transaction logs, messages. Names flashed, transactions matched, and the casual chatter turned into a slow, awful silence. Mark's face turned the color of plaster as his hands trembled. He looked at me and for the first time, he seemed to understand that the woman beside him had become something else. People whispered, phones came out, calls were made. He tried to speak, but the words were swallowed by the room. I didn't move. I sat perfectly still, and because I didn't shout, because I didn't accuse, because I allowed the evidence to speak, the sound of the room's betrayal did the work my voice never could. The partners left in barely contained fury. The woman he'd betrayed slipped away, her face pale. Later, in the taxi home, he begged me quietly to forgive him, promising a million small things. I heard him. I knew how easily his apologies came. I knew they were built of the same polished lies as everything else. I let him talk while I catalogued the affair in my head, the dates, the calls, the way his thumb hovered over her name like a secret ritual. That night I watched him sleep and felt nothing like triumph, only a cold, steady resolve. I had struck the first chord and the melody of his unraveling had begun. I would tighten the noose with patience, with bureaucracy, with the slow, humiliating collapse of a life he had assumed unassailable. The night everything began to unravel, New York was soaked in rain, the kind that makes the city look like it's crying with you. I sat in my car outside the apartment that used to be ours, staring at the faint glow of the window on the third floor. He was there, my husband, with her. They thought they were safe behind those curtains. They thought I had disappeared. But I hadn't. I had only learned how to watch in silence. 4 months, I had collected the fragments of truth, the secret messages, the late-night calls, the receipts he forgot to hide. Every lie he told became another brick in the wall I was building between us. That night, I wasn't there for confrontation. I was there for closure. I walked up the stairs with steady steps, holding nothing but an old key and a heart that had already stopped loving. The door creaked open, and they froze. He called my name like it was a ghost he never expected to see again, but I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply looked at him and said, "You could have told me the truth." The silence that followed was heavier than any words could ever be. I left without another sound, leaving behind the house, the lies, and the woman I used to be. That was the night I decided revenge doesn't always come with fire or noise. Sometimes it comes with calm, the kind that burns quietly until there's nothing left to destroy. After that night, I vanished. Not from the world, but from him. I deleted every trace of myself from his life. No calls, no messages, not even a whisper on social media. To him, it was like I had dissolved into thin air. But behind that silence, I was moving, carefully, strategically. Revenge wasn't going to be loud or messy. It was going to be slow, precise, and unforgettable. I changed my name, my job, even my circle. The woman who once cried over broken promises was gone. What remained was someone who could smile while planning the perfect payback. I started working with a private firm that handled legal investigations, the same kind of firm that once saved his company from bankruptcy. Funny how life turns around when you know exactly where to look. Through the firm's contacts, I discovered how deep his lies truly went: fake accounts, hidden money, and illegal deals masked behind fake charities. The man I once called my husband wasn't just a cheater, he was a fraud, a manipulator, who used love as his cover. So, I began sending anonymous tips, little pieces of truth dropped like poison into his perfect world. A government inquiry opened. His company's accounts were frozen. Investors panicked. Overnight, the man who once bragged about never losing became the headline of every business scandal. And me? I watched from a distance, sipping coffee at a cafe across the street, as he stormed into buildings trying to save his empire. Every scream, every desperate call for help felt like justice whispering back to me, but revenge, it's never that simple. The more I saw him fall, the emptier I began to feel. Because somewhere deep inside, a voice kept asking, was destroying him enough to heal me? I began to play with shadows, to move pieces on a board he never knew existed. I learned who still trusted him, who still answered his calls late at night, and I leaned into their loyalty like a quiet wind that turns a candle into an inferno. I befriended his assistant under a false name, shared harmless confidences, and let her think I was an ally. With patient questions I learned about the passwords he used, the people who covered for him, the small favors that kept his world upright. I sent discreet messages to a former partner, reminding them of a time when favors had been called in without witnesses. I tipped off a regulatory investigator about a courier that never arrived, a contract that had been altered by one careless initial. Little things, nothing dramatic, but precise and surgical: an unreturned email here, a suspicious note there. I watched the ripple grow wider. At dinners, I sat with people who had once praised him, and I listened until they admitted their suspicions aloud. Then I leaned in and said, "You deserve the truth." No dramatics, no accusations, only the suggestion that they look closer. People began to check their own files, to ask awkward questions in private meetings, to hedge their bets and protect their reputations. His allies scattered like birds startled from a ledge. At the same time, I created a trail of breadcrumbs that led investigators to small, inconvenient facts. A shadow account registered under a shell company, a wire transfer with an anonymous recipient, an altered invoice that pointed to a vendor who didn't exist. Each discovery was slow, reliable, and humiliating. Mark's calls went unanswered, then frantic, then pleading. I returned none. Instead, I let him face the cold calculation of corporate betrayal, the loss of trust in boardrooms, where once his name opened doors. But the most delicious part was watching him rewrite his own memory. He began to doubt what he had said and to whom, to question whether his own excuses had ever sounded truthful even to himself. I planted rumors that his affair had been a distraction for worse crimes, and watched as gossip and fear did the work that evidence would later confirm. Nights when he paced the apartment, I imagined his mind as glass, fragile and splintered, each tremor of guilt causing new cracks. He started losing sleep, not from the fear of being exposed alone, but from the horror of realizing he might not be the man he thought he was. That was the moment I understood the cruelty and the cure of psychological revenge. It does not annihilate a person in one rowdy scene, it corrodes their certainty until they are left with nothing solid to stand on. I had given him back his life piece by piece, only to show him the hollowness underneath. And with every careful move I made, I asked myself the same question I had asked months earlier: is this healing, or just another kind of harm? The answer was not simple, but I kept going, because I had tasted the idea of justice, and it had a sweetness I could not ignore. When the final piece fell into place, it didn't sound like victory. It sounded like rain hitting glass, soft, endless, and empty. Mark's company had collapsed under its own weight. The government froze his assets, the board expelled him, and the news channels that once called him a genius now called him the man who built his empire on lies. His face was everywhere, tired, pale, defeated. The same man who once stood tall in designer suits now hid from cameras behind dark glasses. I should have felt proud. I should have smiled. 4 months, this was all I had dreamed of: his downfall, his humiliation, his pain matching mine. But when I stood across the street from his apartment one last time, watching him through the rain, something in me broke again, only quieter this time. He looked lost, not angry, not arrogant, just lost. And suddenly, I realized revenge doesn't end with justice, it ends with silence. That night, I returned home, a new home, far from everything that reminded me of him. I poured myself a glass of wine and stared at my reflection in the window. For a moment, I didn't recognize her, the woman staring back. She looked strong, yes, but there was something hollow behind her eyes. That's when the phone buzzed. An unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. A quiet voice came through. "You don't know me," it said, "but I was the one who received your last email. You should know, he's gone." I froze. "Gone?" I whispered. "He left the city. Left everything. Said he couldn't face what he'd become." The line went dead. I stood there for a long time, the world suddenly feeling heavier than before. I had ended his world, but in doing so, I had ended a part of mine too. Weeks passed. Life returned to its quiet rhythm. The world forgot him, and slowly, I let myself forget too. One morning, I walked past a small bookstore, the same one where we first met years ago. In the window, a book was on display, The Art of Losing Everything, by Emma Hayes. My breath caught his name. I went inside, trembling, and opened the first page. A dedication read, "To the woman who taught me what truth costs, and what silence truly means." For the first time in years, tears came, not of pain, not of guilt, but of something I couldn't name. Maybe forgiveness. Maybe release. Maybe both. I closed the book, looked out at the street of New York bathed in gray morning light, and whispered to myself, sometimes, revenge isn't about ending someone's story, it's about finding where yours begins again. And that was the silence after the storm.